You saw it long before they did. That's what unsettles them. They thought they were keeping you beneath their thumb while you were decoding the entire design. You smirked at their arrogance because you understood the hidden profit inside dismissal. They believed they were erasing you, but all they did was sharpen you. Every insult, every exclusion, every precise attempt to reduce your presence was ammunition. And you weren't just enduring it, you were refining it. You dissected their steps like a strategist, not to join their game, but to construct a battlefield of your own. That's what shakes them now. Not your voice, not your rise, but the brutal truth that you forecasted this moment while they still insisted. You were invisible. You didn't need to proclaim your intent. You only needed patience. Patience is the one element the arrogant always waste, but you wield it like a blade, slicing, adapting, calculating, and when the tides finally turned toward you, they dismissed it as accident. They convinced themselves it was luck, maybe even fate, but the reality gnaws at them now. You knew the path all along. This wasn't magic, it was inevitability, and they panic because they finally see your silence was never weakness. It was hunting not out of malice, but precision. You weren't absent. You were setting the framework. Destiny follows your design, because your design was written in defiance, not chaotic defiance, but focused, patient, relentless defiance. You shattered their assumptions. Without speaking, you made discipline your compass, and time your shield, and creation responded not out of justice, but because it honors preparation. The truth is, their noise was a mask for fear. Your quiet was a signal of certainty. You didn't gamble on success. You declared it, and now that the pieces lock into place in ways they can't disrupt, they don't ask what you did. They ask how long you've been ready. What they still can't see is that vision demands distance. You can't hear truth in a crowd. That's why you stopped justifying. You let them chatter while you calculated. You let them mock while you drafted. You let them dream while you traced the fractures. And now the downfall they prayed for you has circled back to them. You never prepared a fallback, because failure was never an option. Failure was a fantasy sold to the hesitant. You desired it deeper, not from vanity, but because you recognized what hung in balance. And that is the split. They chased trophies. You chased alignment. They shiver now because momentum no longer bends their way. The balance has shifted. You sense it, so do they. The authority they clutched is dissolving. Not because you stole it, but because it was never truly theirs. Their throne was borrowed. Yours was carved. You didn't need to seize power. You became it, and the universe bows to that kind of embodiment. When a person moves in full alignment with their vision, reality yields. People call manifestation mystical, but it's mathematics when commitment governs it. Every choice you made was a formula. Every step you took was a ceremony. Now you enter spaces with weight, and their lungs tighten when your voice breaks the air. Psychologically, they're unraveling because nothing shatters the cunning. Like being dismantled, they depended on your compliance. They thrived on your pause, but you erased both. You severed your attachment to need, detached from outcome. You became untouchable to temptation, so every fiber of you locked into velocity, and velocity is ruthless. It doesn't pause to bargain. It doesn't bow to titles. Crushes the unready, and that's the reckoning they face now. Not just your ascent, but the wreckage of your refusal to compromise. They're not watching a challenger, they're staring at judgment embodied. You didn't transform, you arrived. You always held this form within. They were simply too wedded to their fictions to see it, and now words fail them. Their rhetoric was built for rebels, not replacements. They can't defend against someone who no longer seeks entry. You're not fighting for a seat. You're constructing an entirely new chamber with new laws, new breath, new worth. You won't shrink to soothe them. You are no longer here for approval. You are here for immortality, and that shift of that is the tremor shaking their bones. Let them panic. Let them rewrite their histories, live scrambling to justify your emergence. Let them stumble over their tone when your name echoes in arenas they once guarded. You didn't sneak through. You simply became inevitable. That's the outcome when discipline endures beyond doubt. That's the result when you stop asking consent and start acting as if your ancestors dreamed you into being. Their applause is unnecessary. Their dread is sufficient. respect, because dread is respect wearing a mask, and you've earned both. They fear your vision now, your clarity, the way you made solitude a weapon and forged it into steel. They're not shaken by your victory, they're haunted by knowing you foresaw every piece, that while they toasted small triumphs and chased clicks, you were constructing an empire. You were engineering in silence so that when the stage lit up, it wouldn't alter you. It would only uncover what you always were. And now it has. You are not an interruption. You are a blueprint whose hour has struck, and they can't halt what they never perceived. They mistook your stillness for surrender because they couldn't see the roots beneath. They mocked your quiet, believing it was defeat, but you weren't idle. You were mapping. You were mastering lands they never imagined. They confused waiting with losing because they've never witnessed patience sharpened into vengeance and accuracy. You weren't playing their rules. You were playing with time, and that's what they never expected. They only trained for applause, for trends, for flashy wins that vanish. The moment real pressure shows up, while they chased the spotlight, you built stamina. While they pretended to rise, you mastered depth. You didn't gamble for luck. You engineered the outcome. They kept scrolling for claps, desperate for attention while you scrolled through plans. They praised fleeting relevance. You stayed awake, mapping futures. They mocked your silence, waiting for a reaction, but you weren't built for the crowd. You were built for command. Every time they tried to pull you into chaos, you withdrew into stillness because you knew lions don't debate with pets of the circus. And now they choke on the aftermath of dismissing someone who never played their performance. You moved with patience. They moved with panic. And now they burn out while you're barely warming up. They built castles of paper. You laid stone in the shadows. They clung to fragile unions of ego, but you stood solitary and became inevitable. While they begged for recognition, you made moves that silently altered the board. That's what frightens them now. You never shouted. You calculated. You weren't chasing approval. You were forging something that would outlast trends and silence. Noise. They wanted to be noticed. You wanted permanence, and permanence cannot be erased. No spin can undo a foundation that's real. They remained mentally stuck in rehearsal. They thought holding the audience meant owning the crown, but they missed the truth you never wanted, their seat. You were erecting your own kingdom, unseen, layer after layer, and now the walls are complete, and they still wonder how you arrived. You didn't arrive, you prepared, and in that preparation, you honed your vision, your craft, your will. You bled in silence so no public stage could ever break you. You shattered, alone so your rebirth could never be stopped. They don't know how to measure someone who watched every trick and chose abstinence. They sabotaged themselves every time they worshipped speed over structure. Every time they chose vanity over vision, they rushed into battles unready while you trained for wars they couldn't perceive. You didn't chase hacks, you forged strength. And now you enter the same arena, not clumsy, not lucky, but as inevitability. You step in with gravity and their eyes shift, not because you asked, but because you've become undeniable, and they feel the weight. Integrity doesn't advertise, it enters and rewrites order. They spent years ridiculing the silence they couldn't interpret, and now they wish for the harvest they never sowed. They mocked while you molded, they gossiped while you evolved, and the cut that bleeds them deepest isn't your victory. It's knowing that you saw the game before they even knew they were being studied. You didn't just defeat them, you decoded them. That's the bruise they'll never heal from, because it means you never feared them, not for a heartbeat. You were simply patient, and that kind of patience, it rattles the performers, it strips the insecure. You weren't chasing the spotlight, you were chasing longevity, and now you've become what they can't counterfeit, enduring impact. They change masks, you change the narrative, they pose to stay seen. You move and the axis tilts, and now they circle your orbit, thinking closeness will buy the strength you bled for, but it won't, because you didn't just play the long game, you mastered it. You crafted with strategy they still can't translate. You knew that in a hall full of actors, the truth doesn't shout, survives. Now they watch with new eyes, not as rivals, but as a reckoning. They realized they never grasped what you were building. They only noticed the outer armor, the discipline, the silence, the lack of reaction. What they missed was the battles inside, the sleepless nights, the quiet betrayals you swallowed and studied, the vows you whispered when they thought you'd vanished. You hadn't vanished. You were evolving. You weren't reacting, you were remembering. And when you finally stepped forward, it wasn't to prove them wrong. It was to prove you were right to wait. They called it absence because they never understood silence. But your silence carried pulse, carried design, carried weight so heavy they couldn't measure the depth. While they jumped at shadows, you became one. You weren't talking because you didn't need to. You were designing something so exact, so relentless, that every second of retreat was a strike in disguise. You weren't gone, you were arming. And now as it lands, as the ground beneath them shakes, they realize, too late, the sound they hear is not warning, it's arrival. They once mocked you. Snickers across rooms, secret messages behind screens, poisoned phrases wrapped in politeness. But you were never deaf. You were storing it, cataloging it as evidence. They didn't see that every dismissal was feeding something cold, sharp, and dangerous in you. The hunger that doesn't yell, it carves. They thought you froze. You were forging. And now what they assumed was a footnote has become the entire damned chapter. Because when a silent architect finally unveils the plans, the sound it makes drowns every insult they ever whispered. It's the sound of judgment. You didn't step into the light begging for a glance. You owned it through precision. They thought attention was something you asked for, but you knew better. Attention is gravity. Build it and the world bends. While they live-streamed every move, you logged off. While they posed, you prepared. And that preparation wasn't pretty. It was surgical. It was merciless. It was years of sharpening while no one noticed. But now the echo carries your name. Not because you asked, but because lightning doesn't request approval. Strikes and suddenly you're here. They're checking timelines now, measuring their ripples against your quake, but they can't track your roots because your climb was undocumented. It was engineered, off-grid, off-limits, unreachable to those who never earned proximity. What they ignored is that the deadliest wave is the one unseen. That's what breaks them now. The reality that they can't predict your path because they never knew your beginning. And what they hear now, it's not cheers, it's consequence rattling through the corridors they once claimed as theirs. You don't need to announce now. The way you step announces for you. Your outcomes scream louder than all their staged reels. Their playbook depended on visibility, yours on inevitability. And when inevitability arrives, fear arrives with it. You forged momentum in the shadows so that when the light hit, you didn't freeze, you ignited. They believed power came from noise. You understood it came from pressure. And now each stride you make sounds like a signal to those who never valued silence. Until now, there's a fear only architects of destiny can create. The fear of being dismantled by someone who never begged for the stage. That's you. That's the aura you carry. And it's why their eyes follow, why they murmur, why they falter when your presence enters. Because they were actors in rehearsal while you rehearsed reality. And you trained so precisely that now every step looks like prophecy realized. That's why they shiver. You didn't just appear, you descended, and the shock rearranged the ladder itself. Let them keep chasing the mystery of your rise. They'll never uncover the trail. No bloopers, no behind the scenes. Your empire was built in stillness, in the kind of solitude that bends most minds, but not yours. You forged claws in silence. You buried doubts and grew steel in their place while they don't bounce back from this, because what emerged isn't just your triumph, it's their erasure. You never chased their circle. You built a world they now revolve around. And when they ask why, your only answer is, I played the long game in silence. And when it struck, the world shifted, shaken, because lightning doesn't send a notice, it arrives. You didn't tremble when they schemed because you had already charted their next 10 choices. You watched them try to script your downfall with the smug confidence of children clutching crayons over blueprints they could never grasp. You read the deception before they dared to whisper it. That's what makes you dangerous. You didn't merely answer the chaos, you prepared for it. You walked through betrayal as if you had rehearsed it, not suffered it. They assumed you were surprised, but you weren't pierced by the blade. You were measuring its path, and when it struck, you didn't cry. You laughed because their treachery only proved what you already knew. They were predictable, and predictable things are simple to dismantle. They failed to grasp what it means to see, not with sight but with awareness. You weren't guessing their motives. You were recording them. You marked their slips, collected their excuses, and traced their loops like a faulty circuit. They weren't cruel. They were sluggish. Sluggish in thought, sluggish in spite, sluggish in assuming you wouldn't notice, but you did. You always do. You let them chatter, let them fake, let them spin their brittle net of manipulation, imagining they were clever. But their quiet was blaring. Their staged kindness was louder, and your silence, it was the loudest of all. The sound of one who waits to strike with surgical patience. The most disturbing thing about you is that you don't need to react to prove you were right. You don't join their emotional games. You just wait for the walls they raised on deception to fall. And when they do, you don't boast. You record, because strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it glides softly through the ruins of your foe's arrogance, leaving marks made of foresight they couldn't believe you saw coming because you never warned them. But why would you warn them? You were never saving them. You were allowing them to strangle themselves with their own script. Psychologically, they're unsettled because you shatter their core belief that people can't face truth without disguise. You didn't sugarcoat. You didn't give them the comfort of denial. You simply knew. You knew them long before they removed their mask. You weren't startled when the treachery arrived. You were weary of its predictability. And now that your silence has ended and the world sees them as they really are, their greatest terror has taken form. Exposure in the presence of someone who had already mapped the aftermath. You weren't seeking to be admired. You were seeking precision. They mistook your clarity for coldness, but coldness doesn't carve like this. Coldness doesn't erase lies with grace. You didn't just see the truth, you shaped your kingdom upon it. And now that it's undeniable, they scramble to shrink your voice, twist the record, bury the evidence. But it's too late. The prophecy they dismissed has become the foundation you now stand on. And their scrambling is just background noise, echoes beneath the calm of someone who saw the disaster forming and never flinched. You're not powerful because you strike first. You're powerful because you never need to. You enter conflict like it's instinct, not effort. You sit across from the very architects of betrayal and return their creation, but sharper, perfected by patience. That's why they break, not from your actions, but from your permission. You let them write the outline of their collapse. You let them play freely, and when the final act arrived, they saw what was always true. You were the hand guiding the play. They believed that strength was in noise, speed, and spectacle. You proved it lived in discipline, that the strongest weapon is the one that never leaves its sheath. You let them feel untouchable, not out of pity but calculation. You measured their limits, and they went past them. They always do. For people who think they're untouchable rarely look back, and when they finally did, the reflection waiting was you calm, anchored already, holding the ending. You knew they'd bend under weight because you placed the weight there. You knew they'd lean on lies because you watched them practice dishonesty until it was second nature. You didn't confront them. You didn't warn them. You only waited for their own design to betray them. And when it did, you didn't rage. You released. That's what chills them now. Not your vengeance, but your absence. You're not chasing balance. You are balance itself. Silent, precise, and absolute. Now when you speak, they can't decide if it's memory or prophecy. You move with the quiet certainty of one who doesn't guess, one who knows. And that knowing unsettles them more than anger, because deceit seeks loopholes, it feeds on disorder. But you are steady. Steadiness suffocates liars. It strips their illusions bare, and when they see you untouched, unwavering, and walking with total clarity, they finally grasp the truth they never had control, not for a moment,